Good day, investors. Welcome to Vested with me, Jared Bowers. I have a quick request of you. If you have been pleasantly surprised by how our discussions of portfolio management and investing concepts have been more interesting and more applicable to life just beyond money, would you share this episode with a friend or two? Go ahead and listen to it first. You definitely want to make sure that you're sharing a good one. It would be a bit too risky to endorse an episode before you've listened to it, right? And look at that. What an easy segue into today's topic. We are continuing our discussion on risk. In the last episode, I stated my case for why volatility, the ups and downs, is a really bad way of measuring risk, even though it is the main way that financial professionals measure risk, and volatility is the main way that we tend to feel like things are risky in our own lives. And after hitting that from what felt like 27 different angles, I rested my case. No, actually, I didn't fully rest my case, because volatility will be a topic again in the future. But at least for now, we're on the same page. Risk isn't the ups and downs. Risk is the likelihood of permanent loss in something that we value. The likelihood of losing or damaging something we care about. Today, we're talking about how to measure risk and manage risk in our own lives. Specifically, the risk that we think we're managing for versus the bigger risk that's often there. And I'll give you my thesis up front. The biggest risk most of us face is not in losing what you have. It is missing out on what you could have built. Let me ask you a series of questions. What is the bigger risk? Going to the gym and possibly getting sore, embarrassed, injured? Or not going to the gym for 30 years and reaping the returns of an inactive life? What is the bigger risk? Having the hard conversation and maybe feeling awkward for a while? Or avoiding the conversation until the relationship quietly breaks? What is the bigger risk? Investing in ownership and experiencing volatility, or never owning assets that can grow? In each case, the thing that feels risky is often not the real risk. The real risk is usually hiding on the side that feels safe. The side where we don't take action. Where we don't put in the reps. Where we don't invest. Right now, I want to shift the conversation to talk about how risk is applied in life beyond money. What is risk in other areas of life? I'll remind us one more time of our improved definition of risk. The likelihood of permanent loss in something that we value. Breaking something beyond repair. Losing something we can't get back. Likelihood of injury that might cause scarring or lack of full function. Likelihood of not being able to continue doing something that we care about. Let's apply our volatility discussion to a fitness example as we look to better understand risk. Volatility, the ups and downs in fitness, would be things like soreness, elevated heart rate, feeling of fatigue, burning in the muscle, reduced endurance or reduced strength in the hours and days after a big effort. Those things can actually be really good in the right context. And if we label them as risk or as bad, that may keep us from pursuing healthy movement in many cases. That may keep us from pursuing sports, activity, things that push us physically. On the other hand, risk when it comes to fitness would be injury, often signaled by pain that is beyond the discomfort of stress on the body. Risk in fitness is something that has the potential to remove us from being able to continue to pursue the goal or play the game. When it comes to our example of physical movement, someone might argue that any fitness-related activity carries with it the risk of everything that I just said. And someone who looks at exercise that way will not exercise intentionally. Sure, you might get in shape and you might get healthy, but you could also tear your Achilles or have a heart attack. So isn't that risky? And isn't that why we should avoid it? My answer to that question is twofold. First, I don't think that's why they're avoiding it. They're probably avoiding exercise because of the effort required and the feelings of volatility that come with it. The strain, the discomfort, the soreness. The risk of injury is almost certainly just an excuse. Second, I would agree that all those risks are present to some degree, but they are comparatively low probability risks versus the comparatively high probability of the benefits that you can expect to get. And even more, when you consider the comparably low risk of exercise versus the high risk of poor health outcomes in your future, we can see the issue. The downside in exercising is much lower than the upside. Or, said in a positive frame, the upside or the benefits of exercise are so much greater than the downsides. But most people live their lives as though movement is more dangerous than inactivity. Let's apply this same frame to other areas of life. One might say that being in relationships with other people is riskier than not being in relationships with others at all. One might think that traveling internationally is riskier than not traveling and seeing the world. One might believe that when it comes to money, investing in the market is riskier than just holding your money in cash. And that idea is quite prevalent because I've seen it in practice many, many times. And I've heard it said out loud many times, that investing is riskier than not investing. These examples demonstrate how most people assess risk, upside, downside, in those situations. These inaccurate views of risk and reward apply to the average person. Not based on what they tell me they think risk is, but based on their actions, the investments that they do and do not make. And even if most would say something else, I care a lot more about people's actions than what they might say they believe. Because the average person does not invest in their physical health. The average person doesn't invest in the markets. The average person does very little intentional investing in their relationships. And I'm confident that the reasons for why this is true tie into what we talked about a little bit ago with our health. It's hard. It's uncomfortable. It can and often does introduce volatility, and it feels risky. You've heard me talk about average before. It can sound like I'm pretty down on the average person, not because they're dumb or hopeless or worthless. I'm down on average not because of what they say they believe. It's because the average is wrong a lot of the time based on the actions they do and do not take, the investments they do or do not make. And truly, I'm not down on the average person. I'm down on the average approach to investing that leads to mediocre, unfulfilled, uninvested lives. And to be fair, I make a lot of assumptions about the average, but they are assumptions that are informed by experience. And I want to make clear that I care tremendously about the average person, just like I do about the below and above average person. Looking at average outcomes helps me illustrate these points. And just because something is average does not mean it's acceptable. And just in case you don't yet agree that we should not shoot for average, or more specifically that we should shoot for above average, consider this. How many people talk about their new baby and say, I can't wait to see the average life they have, all the average things they're going to do? No, we imagine our children as being extraordinary. Cutting-edge scientists or doctors or famous musicians or exceptional athletes. We don't hope they live to the average of their ability. We imagine them having the best outcomes. Yet, we tend to settle a lot when it comes to our own lives, and we use average as an excuse or as a pass. We already know and recognize that risk exists in extremes. Extremes of physical pursuit, extremes of career focus, extremes of consumption, extremes of taking risks in the market, which, by the way, is not investing, it's gambling. Those are the easy ones to identify. They're easy to see. But the pull toward an average approach to investing that results in average outcomes misses seeing the bigger risk that most people are living inside of every day. And a common assumption is this: the greatest risks in life lie on the side of action. We think it's like skydiving. Definitely riskier than sitting at home in front of the TV. That is a clear case where the action does increase the real risk. And we are allowed and encouraged to avoid risks that may result in game over scenarios. Most people assume that the main cause of poor results or poor returns or losses are the bad or ill-informed or risky actions that are taken. That risk lies on the side of action. But that is not how most risks we face work. Very few things we think of as being risky are game over or real downside situations. What about this example where someone feels like the choice that they're making or considering making is really risky? A young man who thinks, I'm so glad I didn't ask that girl out. What if she would have said no? Boy, that was a close call. But what he actually did, by not taking what felt like a risk, was a step toward a lonelier life, rather than taking a step that may have resulted in something good, or at least would have resulted in learning a lesson on what to do or what not to do when approaching somebody about a date, which may have someday led toward real relationship. He thought the bigger risk was in taking the action. But consider this. In most situations we face in life, the worst that taking action results in is volatility, or the boat rocking, or being uncomfortable, or being noticed in the wrong way. And if we are a good investor, a purposeful investor, that unbalance to the downside risk is not true in most areas of life. This is because many of the areas in life that we care about and can invest in have something very special about them. That is, they have a positive expected payoff. This is very, very important to understand. They have more upside than downside. The expected result is not a loss. The expected result of investment is a gain. And in those cases, the bigger downside is never investing in the first place. Having that hard conversation with a coworker or family member, starting to work out, raising your hand to lead, making the investment. Those are not situations where the risk is to the downside. The expected return is positive. If you make an intentional investment, financial or otherwise, and let it play out multiple times, from intentional investment to final result, the outcome is often going to be positive. And in many of those cases, the positive outcome is not linear, meaning that 1 unit of investment equals 2 units of gain, or 10 units of investment equals 30 units of gain. In many cases, the returns are exponential. Investments you make now have payoffs in the future that are so big, it is hard to fathom. The bigger investment you make and the longer you make it for, the greater and greater and greater the returns are. Compounding, exponential growth. Not just upward and to the right, but sharply upward and to the right. With those kinds of investments, as you go along, we can build account balances that are so large and so healthy that they start to grow on their own, that can actually compound. We've talked about that in detail in past episodes, haven't we? And there are many areas of life that fit this profile beyond money. And here's something important to understand about compounding. The upward and to the right trajectory that we admire in hindsight rarely feels upward and to the right when we're living through it. From far enough away, it can look smooth, predictable, almost straight up. But that's only because we're zoomed out, and we're seeing it over a large time scale. If you zoom in close enough on any meaningful compounding curve, you will see volatility everywhere. Setbacks, frustrations, down days, down weeks, maybe even down years. Compounding does not feel smooth while you are living inside of it. It only looks smooth once enough time has passed. Money investing is, of course, the easy one to wrap our minds around here. $100 invested today has the potential to turn into $1 million 50 years from now. Don't believe me? Warren Buffett achieved that level of returns for decades. And so what if $100 only turns into $100,000 or even $10,000? All of those are an incredible result of compounding, but it takes a long time. We'll specifically dig into exponential growth and the power of compounding in another future episode. But as we look at risk as applied to action versus inaction, the same unlock for returns applies to physical movement. It applies to relationships. This same applies to our career. And in the case of fitness, the bigger risk isn't the gym. The bigger risk isn't dropping a weight on our foot or pulling a muscle or getting dehydrated. It's definitely not getting sore or sweating too much. The risk we should care about is 20, 30, 40 years of sedentary living, compounding in the negative direction, which results in chronic disease, lack of mobility, inability to do the things of life that we want to do. You want to talk about the future payoff of proper physical activity? It's not that people who regularly exercise just live a few years longer than those who don't, which is true. That might not sound like a great payoff to you, especially if those extra few years are decades in the future. The real returns of that activity are your last 12 or 14 years spent living a full and active life without physical or mental constraints, versus the compounded returns of inactivity that results in your last 10 years of life living in a nursing home. Those are the kinds of physical health returns that rival $100 turning into $1 million. The bigger risk in a relationship isn't vulnerability, putting yourself out there, reaching out that might result in feeling awkward or risking embarrassment, or even something that feels like social rejection. The real risk is isolation and loneliness. Frail relationships that then compound to a point where we are alone and we don't know how to engage with people and develop connections. The biggest risk in a career isn't taking initiative and stepping out and not being able to get the promotion or the raise that we were asking for, or not getting to lead that project or team that we raised our hand for. The real risk is not going for it, not raising our hand, missing out on opportunities for growth and leadership. The real risk is irrelevance and mediocrity, compounding for decades that results in severe stuckness, maybe a dead-end career, and just wondering what the point of all that work even was. Just like with money, the risk isn't the movement. The risk isn't the ups and downs. The risk isn't volatility. The risk is not giving yourself the opportunity to use the skills, expertise, and knowledge you have gained, or have the opportunity to develop. If the expected return of an investment is positive, the promotion, the date, the physical health, then not making that investment is guaranteeing the loss of what could have been. And what we can build is always greater than what we have now. Therefore, that is where the bigger risk lies. Not investing and missing out on those positive returns. Because any and all of these areas that we talked about, fitness, relationships, career, money, you can try to avoid volatility. And maybe you can for the most part. And by doing that, you do not just have a risk of loss, you guarantee the loss. Because avoiding volatility is only done by avoiding making the investment. Avoiding volatility in everything will guarantee failure through mediocrity, failure through lack of forward progress, taking growth off the table, never building what was there to be built. You may know by now that I am a student of Warren Buffett when it comes to financial investing. And do you know what Buffett's biggest financial investing mistakes are from his perspective? You might guess that his biggest mistakes were in the investments he bought that went down in price, where he lost money. And that's a fair guess. Buffett and I are similar in a few ways. And one of those ways is how we hate losing money. Not sure that's a unique trait, but still. Taking it a step further, he hates losing money for his investors, the owners of Berkshire Hathaway. I can certainly relate to that. When my own personal portfolio is down, I can honestly say that I don't care that much. I take it as information, evaluate it for opportunity, and most of the time, choose to stay the course because I believe in the businesses that I own. But when my clients' portfolios go down, especially when they go down more than the market, that bothers me. I do apply the same approach. I take it as information, I look for opportunity, but I still don't like it. And if I'm ever bothered by what's happening in the market, it's probably because my clients' portfolios are down. But back to Buffett. That is not what he considers his biggest mistakes to be. Not losses. He has stated multiple times in his annual shareholder letters, in interviews, in conversations with students, that his biggest mistakes were missing out on great investments that went up in value. What he missed out on, not what he lost. That, my friends, is a wealthy mindset. Another area where Buffett and I are aligned is that he doesn't care much for volatility as a measure of risk. He's built quite a career and a track record mostly ignoring the market noise. Buffett's biggest mistakes, the ones he regrets the most, have all been errors of omission, not errors of commission. As I keep coming back to today, when it comes to many areas that we can and should be investing in, the risk, the downside, does not primarily lie on the side of investing. it lies on the side of not investing. The risk of inaction and the downside of inaction is so much greater than the risk and downside of action, assuming it is a positive pursuit with a positive expected payoff. But that is not the way so many of us look at it. We mostly think about risk only as the possible losses on the downside. We rarely consider the missed opportunity. This is a mischaracterization and a misunderstanding of risk. Most risk in life is what is unearned, missed out on, or squandered rather than in what is lost. I mentioned in the last episode that we live in the safest time in human history. I didn't expand on that statement other than saying that historically, taking a chance often meant literal survival risk. Yet today, for most people listening to this, risk usually just means embarrassment, discomfort, uncertainty, rejection, or a temporary setback. We are hardwired to look for risk and downside all around us. This was likely really helpful when the world really was dangerous. But this is a massive hindrance now that walking to the river to get water and having to avoid poisonous snakes and hungry predators has been completely removed from our lives. Both the walking for water and the avoidance of predation parts. Yet, that fear response has been redirected in our modern lives. And the versatility of that fear response is no less present even though the dangers today are not really dangerous anymore. Now, instead of that shot of adrenaline and that fight or flight response triggered by the rustle in the bushes just ahead of us, we get that same shot of adrenaline and that same fight or flight response when someone sends us a critical email, or when we get that phone call that we've been dreading, or someone flips us off on the road. In our historical past, that adrenaline rush and that urge to fight or to run away served us really well. We needed all of those survival responses just to survive. Today, we get that same physical response, that same emotional response, but in nearly every case, we would be best served without it. And we would therefore be best served to ignore it. Because those responses that are ingrained in us make us think that benign, modern situations represent real risk. To be even more accurate, they make us think that opportunistic modern situations represent real risk. Risk, of course, being permanent loss in something that we value. And then responding to a situation as though it is actually risky just results in us not making the investment, which guarantees the bigger loss. The returns that were there but we gave up because it felt risky. And our default mode is to see action as the risky part. Why do we do this? I think it's quite simply that we fall for the same trap in life that we fall for in financial markets. Believing that volatility is a good and accurate measure of risk. Mistaking movement for fragility. But when we apply the real measure of risk, the likelihood of permanent loss in what we value, we can see that not investing is the main way that we increase the likelihood of loss. That we guarantee loss in those cases where we don't invest. Investing is the only way that we can achieve gains moving forward. So, I think I've come around to the only conclusion that we can make. Investing serves to reduce risk. Investing and investing well is the way that we reduce risk. You might have heard me refer to dead money before. Dead money is money that is not invested. There's this inaccurate notion that cash is king, that it's safe. And that is only true in the sense that it can or should be used for a purpose. It needs to be invested to serve its purpose. Just like we need to be invested to serve our purpose, to live a vested life. Avoiding all risk means no upside, which is a type of downside itself. Removing yourself from the opportunity for returns is the most guaranteed way of ensuring that you lose. The greatest risk we face is in the positive returns we do not get, not in the negative returns we might experience. Ironically, one of the best ways to put what you have right now at risk is to overprotect it. This is related to what we've talked about with the motivation of avoidance rather than the motivation of pursuit. Investing toward not something rather than investing toward something. The over-paranoid and protective significant other who is so afraid of losing the relationship that their actions end up pushing the other person away. The saver who never invests out of fear of losing money who then guarantees their hard-earned money loses value over time. And, we know now, what's even worse, loses out on future returns. The overprotective parent who ruins a child's ability to manage responsibilities or work through challenges, anxieties, and nerves. Instead, they do things for them, solve their kids' problems, keep any hard or hardship away from them, making it more likely that their incapable child becomes an incapable adult. That overprotective instinct to save our kids from hard things is really hard to respond well to. I've seen too many examples of it firsthand in my educational roles. I could talk through a lot of the bad examples, and I probably will at some point, because they are rich with lessons and applications for us. Not just as parents, but also as investors. But instead, I want to tell you about a positive example of when parents, teachers, and a school community did not stand in the way of hard for a student, and it paid off massively. I've mentioned a few times before that I don't just volunteer to teach investments to the seniors at the classical Christian school that my kids attend, but Alicia and I are involved in all sorts of ways. We love the school and we invest in it heavily. One of those ways that I'm involved is as a school board member, and I've had the privilege of being the board chairman for the past couple years. One of the biggest benefits, maybe the only true benefit, of being the school board chairman is being able to stand on stage and hand each graduate their high school diploma at graduation. I get to shake their hand, look them in the eyes, and tell them congratulations as I hand them their diploma. It is truly a privilege and an honor. We recently had our graduation, at least as of the time I'm recording this, and so I was just able to do that. We believe at our school in learning how to present in front of people, making well-reasoned arguments, present our case to an audience. And we start that in second grade. All three of my kids, their first presentation in front of their class, solo, happened in second grade. We have presentations and recitations that get progressively bigger and more challenging as the kids progress through their education. This culminates in a senior thesis, where in 12th grade, each of our students picks a topic, comes up with a thesis, writes a 20-page research paper on said thesis topic, and most importantly, presents and defends their thesis topic to the school board and the school faculty, where they are then questioned and often challenged on their conclusions. One of our graduates this year, when she was younger, was absolutely terrified of speaking in front of people. And when I say terrified, I really do mean it. I remember in grade school, she had to have the microphone held for her and a teacher's arm around her just to get through reciting a poem she learned, fighting through the tears the whole time. I remember my wife asking once years ago, on one such day, how is she going to do senior thesis? Well, let me tell you how she did her senior thesis. Excellently, confidently, without a hint of nerves or hesitation. She presented and defended her senior thesis, and she crushed it. It was one of the best presentations, most natural deliveries, and confident handlings of questions that we had this year. And looking back on her grade school days, when she was terrified to speak in front of anyone, it may have looked to someone on the outside as cruel or too much to have her stand up there as a fourth grader, crying, embarrassed, in front of the entire school. Wouldn't the safe thing to do be to let her avoid it? Give her an accommodation? Wouldn't the kindest thing to do be to let her avoid something that was obviously so hard? Too hard at the time, arguably. No. The cruel thing would have been to let her remain as she was, terrified of something that had next to no downside, but incredible upside. The upside that is now showing through and will continue to shine through as she applies her skills and confidence that she's earned through doing things that were really hard for her. The kindest thing possible was what happened. She was not allowed to avoid the difficult and scary thing. The modern narrative of be kind to yourself is interpreted by most as permission to avoid the hard reps, which ironically is the most unkind thing that we can do to ourselves. And having low expectations of those around us is also one of the most unkind things that we can do to others. And the people close to us are in the best position to see where we are underinvesting, avoiding something, or not living up to our potential and therefore experiencing the bigger risk, giving up the upside that can and should be had. So here is a fun way to apply this. I'll give you and challenge you to complete the Ask 3 People exercise. I recommend that you reach out to 3 people who know you well and who you trust, and ask them, what areas do you see in my life that I have capacity for, that I have potential in, that I might be underinvesting in? Do you see returns that are there to be had that I am not investing toward? And if you get some honest and direct answers, what you hear might surprise you. And what you hear is likely to be in an area that feels risky to you. But I bet those areas will not be things that have big downsides and small upsides. It's very likely to be the reverse. Now, I know that very few will do this exercise, and that's okay, because the few of you who do will get some really great feedback from it. So, here's another application exercise that is more accessible. I'm offering an accommodation because the first one is just too hard. This next one is the hidden risk audit. Ask yourself the question, where am I calling something risky? Because it's uncomfortable, uncertain, potentially embarrassing, but it actually has low downside and high upside. Some examples are having that hard conversation that you've been putting off, making that financial investment that you know you should be making, starting the blog or discussion group or podcast, asking her out or asking her to marry you, or telling your friend that he needs to man up and make the ask to her. Maybe it's applying for that new role, inside or outside your company. Asking your boss if you can take the lead on a big project. Volunteering to start a group or charity or a team. Taking swimming lessons, piano lessons, or voice lessons as an adult. Can you imagine? How about going back to school as an old person who isn't even in their 20s anymore? Maybe sharing your faith. Or a common one, going to the gym, joining that workout group. Or how about this? Throwing out all the garbage food in your house and dealing with the complaints for a little while. All of these are examples that are likely to have much greater upside than downside. Most of them likely have no true downside at all. All of us have something we think about pretty often that fits one of these categories or is something similar. And here's a tell. Is there something in your life that you want to do, but when you think about it, it gives you butterflies? It makes you feel those nerves. Those butterflies, that nervous feeling, is a signal of one of two things: real risk with real downside, or perceived risk with big upside that is being avoided because it feels like volatility. Remember, volatility is necessary on the path that is upward and to the right. So instead of mistaking volatility for risk, apply the proper definition of risk. Is something you value really at risk, and this investment you are avoiding could result in permanent loss? Or is the expected return positive and likely, and you're just avoiding it because it might result in some ups and downs? In the last episode, we invested our time in understanding what risk is not. Risk is not volatility, the ups and downs. Today, we focus this episode on framing what risk is, and that most of the risk we have in life is in what is given up or never achieved. In the next episode, we are going to continue our focus on risk in one more direction, on how returns are usually not balanced. Returns typically have one of two profiles: limited downside and big upside, or the opposite. And we are going to put a name to this kind of return profile: asymmetry. And once you see it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Okay, thank you for investing in yourself and in those around you. I will talk to you next time. Can you imagine what your great-great-grandfather would say about what we consider hard or risky today? I do not think that he would be impressed.